Alright, starting things off at the Aria 2-5 and in for $1,000. I raise a 20 from under the gun with pocket jacks. Low jack and big blind call, and we take a flop three ways, which comes 10-6-4 with a hard draw. Always nice to flop unders when holding jacks. Big blind checks, I see bet 40, low jack calls, big blind folds. Heads up to a turn of a queen of spades, so a bit of an iffy card, as I now lose to some queen high flush draws, as well as overcard floats like ace queen and king queen. With the jack of hearts in my hand though, it does give me confidence to keep firing to try and get value against hands like a 10, and draws like 5-7 and 6x. I bet 100, and low jack doesn't seem to have too much, and folds. Next spot there's a low jack raise to 15. I 3-bet to 50 from the high jack with queen 10 of diamonds. Small blind cold calls, and low jack folds. Heads up to a flop of 8-5-4 with a spade draw, so nothing going on for my hand. Small blind checks, and I think it's going to be comprised of hands like pocket 8s through pocket jacks, and some suited broadways. I'm not overly concerned about middle or bottom set, and despite the board not being in my favor, I opt for a larger bet of 75 to hopefully garner folds from the portion of my opponent's range that consists of Broadway cards. And luckily, it looks like I do, as he lets it go. Shortly after I raise a 20 from the cutoff with ace-6 of clubs. Only the button calls, and we go heads up to a flop of ace-9-6 with two spades and a heart, and giving me top and bottom. I see bet 20, button calls. Turn comes the deuce of hearts, adding another flush draw. Pretty straightforward to just keep firing, and I put out 65. Button calls again, and fifth street comes a king. So a good blank as I don't expect to be up against ace-king or ace-9. I bet again for value, this time 175. Button ends up, calling again, I table, and it's good. Next hand I pick up a premium from the low jack and raise to 20. Hijack, who is the same player from the previous hand, calls, and we go heads up to a flop of 7-5-5, all red. Holding the queen of diamonds, I check and play this one deceptively. Hijack checks as well. Fourth street comes a jack of hearts, and I try to go for value this time, and I bet 30. Hijack calls, and the river comes, the 10 of diamonds. As noted, holding the queen of diamonds, I'm not too worried about flushes, and I bet 80 targeting a jack. Hijack thinks a bit before, putting in the raise to 260. I think it's reasonable for my opponent to raise a hand like ace-jack or jack-10 for value, so I call. Unfortunately, he's got ace-6 of diamonds for the goods, and you know that stuff about blockers and card removal? Well, sometimes that shit doesn't matter, and if you agree, please do me a favor, hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons. Last interesting hand of 2-5, and it's a doozy. Low jack raises to 15, cutoff calls, and a 3-bet to 70 from the button with ace-queen offsuit. Low jack folds, and cutoff does something unexpected and puts in a small back raise to 180. Admittedly perplexed by this line, I call given the attractive price, playing in position. Heads up to a flop of 9-5-3 with a spade draw, and cutoff bets 90. I decide to raise to 225, and my reasoning isn't going to be perfectly sound, but I figured that raising here would slow him down on future streets, and I could be getting value against spade draws that I beat, such as ace-10 suited, ace-jack suited, etc. He calls, and we go to a blank turn of a deuce of hearts. Cutoff checks, and this is where I make one of many blunders. Despite my hand looking like an overpair that should bet turn for value and equity denial, I check back. River comes a 6 of diamonds, and cutoff reintroduces the aggression with a bet of 225. And yet completely lost in this spot, I search for hands that I can beat like ace-10s, ace-jacks, king-queens, and decide to make the hero call. Well, it turns out that he does have ace-high, but with the king to go with it for the winning hand. Don't know what to say about this one other than this one being a lesson on how not to play ace-queen. Alright, I move over to the 5-10 and buy in for 3,000. In the first interesting hand, I raise a 30 from the low jack with 10-8 of clubs. Button and big blind call, and we take a flop three ways, which comes queen 3 deuce, all black and giving me a club draw. Big blind checks, I see bet 50, and button raises to 130. Big blind folds, I call, and the turn comes a 4 of hearts. I check and button continues their aggression for 220, and this is one of the problems with playing marginal suited cards out of position. It's hard to realize my equity, and even if I make my hand, it could be dirty. For example, I could be drawing nearly dead against hands like ace wheel of clubs. All that in mind, I fold. Next hand the straddle is on, and low jack raises to 60. I pick up jacks on the button and 3-bet to 200, Small blind cold calls, and low jack, 4 bets to 600. And as the popular Chinese saying goes when in a shitty spot, ay-ya. But given the attractive price, I can't help myself and call. Small blind folds, and the flop comes 8-8-6, so one of those flops where I'm destined to potentially go broke, if he has it. Low jack bets 420, and I proceed with a call. Turn comes the queen of diamonds, and low jack doesn't think too long and jams for 1100 effective. It's possible that I could have the best hand against ace king, but it feels unlikely that my opponent would just rip ace king on a queen high board, since it's rainbow. So yeah, I played this one poorly, but with the queen coming on the turn, it gives me a reason to let this one go. A short while later, there's a cutoff raise of 25. I call from the button with pocket fours, small blind calls, and big blind re-raises to 170. Cutoff calls, and although just calling here leaves me with a capped range, I do get to play in position and put in the 170. Small blind calls as well, and we go to a flop four ways, which comes queen 3-3 with a diamond draw. Small blind checks, big blind c-bets 210, cutoff calls, and I also call and don't have a good reason other than I'm in the mood to gamble. Small blind also calls, and just like the last video, I'm looking for a miracle on 4th Street, but it doesn't come as it's the 9 of hearts. Small blind checks and big blind checks this time. Cutoff now takes control of the betting and puts out 500. I finally find the fold button, small blind calls, and big blind folds. To finish off the hand, the river comes a deuce of clubs, small blind checks, cutoff jams for small blind's 2600 effective, and small blind begrudgingly folds, pocket tens. So a bit of a nightmare session thus far and being down 1800. I then find ace queen offsuit from under the gun and raise to 40. Low jack, cutoff and button call, and we go multi-way to a flop that comes ace high with a diamond draw. Good flop to c-bet, I put out 100. Low jack calls, other two players fold, and we go heads up to a turn of a 7 of clubs. Good blank as I should have the best hand a decent chunk of the time. I check intending to induce, and check rip a bit over a 1k effective, but the low jack checks back. River comes a 10 of clubs, and I fire 230 for a bit of thin value targeting some ace wheels and king x holding. He doesn't think too long and puts in the call. I table, and it's good. Next battle rates a 30 from the hijack with jack 10 offsuit. Button in the blinds call, and the flop comes ace jack 5 with 2 diamonds and a club. Checks to me, and I c-bet range for 40. Button calls, small blind folds, big blind calls. We go 3 ways to a turn of a 7 of clubs, adding more draws to the board. Surprisingly, action checks through, and the river rolls off a welcome sight, the jack of clubs giving me trips. Big blind checks, and although backdoor clubs do complete, I gotta bet this one for value, and I put out 150. Button goes into the tank, and folds, and the big blind follows suit. No value added unfortunately, but nice to build some positive momentum. Not too long after, we were playing four-handed, cutoff raises to 40, and I defend the big blind with jack 6 of spades. Flop comes king 5 deuce rainbow, and action checks through. Turn comes a 4 of hearts, putting up a backdoor heart draw, and giving me a gutter. I lead 50, and cutoff calls. River comes a deuce of clubs, so I brick out, but given that my opponent has played this hand passively post-flop, I don't think he has much. I bet 140, and get a fold. Nice to get a small one through. Short-handed once again, there's a cutoff raise of 30, and I 3-bet to 110 from the big blind with pocket tens. Cutoff calls, and the flop comes 4-3 deuce, all black. A slightly dicey flop, but I c-bet 110, and he calls. Turn comes with jack of clubs, adding a backdoor flush draw. Although I'm now losing to jack x of spades, there are still a variety of hands and draws to get value from. I bet 250, and he calls once again. And although I was buried early on in this session, I find a nice insurance policy, as the river comes a 10 of hearts giving me middle set. Hoping this pays dividends, I bet 600. Looking back though, playing this as a check would have probably been better to give my opponent a chance to bet since all the draws bricked. Nevertheless, he looks slightly displeased and folds. A few more hands to run through. We are 5-handed, under the gun limps, cutoff raises to 50, button calls, I call from the big blind with ace 9 of clubs, and under the gun calls as well. 4 ways to a wet one of 10-9-8 with 2 hearts and a club. Surprisingly, action checks through, and the turn comes a great card, giving me aces up. With a very vulnerable 2 pair, I bet 120, under the gun and cutoff call, button folds. 3 ways to a river, which comes a bad one, it's the 10 of diamonds. I check, Under the gun checks, cutoff bets 300, I fold, and under the gun raises to 1,000. And after some deliberation, cutoff begrudgingly folds ace queen offsuit. Alright, 6-handed now, and I raise a 30 from under the gun with ace king of spades. Hijack calls, and cutoff raises to 110. I decide to under rep and just flat, and hijack calls as well. 3 ways to a flop of king 7-3 rainbow, so a solid flop, barring being up against pocket 7s or 3s. Action checks through, and the turn comes a 9 of spades, completing the rainbow. I lead for 170, and surprisingly get called by both players. River comes a 7 of diamonds pairing the board, so a pretty good run out. I bet 420 hoping to garner a call. Hijack tank folds, and the cutoff folds as well. Last interesting hand, I raise a 30 from the cutoff with ace jack of spades. Small blind calls, and big blind puts in a re-raise to 140 with not much back. I call, small blind folds, and we go heads up to a flop of jack 9-9. Big blind jams for 270, I call, and we're off to a run out.
Jack any good?
Alright, just finished the session here at the Aria. Played much longer than I thought I would, and wasn't even planning to vlog tonight, but started around 11 and it's 4 a.m. right now. Gonna wake up in a few hours to play a tournament, but as far as today's results or tonight's results, I started with the 2-5 game, got in that game for 1,000 and cashed out for 256, so lost 744. Not really sure what I was thinking in that ace queen hand that I ended up losing, and then hopped over to the 5-10, and it was a pretty tough lineup. I bought it for 3,000 and got stuck right off the bat with that jacks hand. Wasn't really sure if that was a great play to continue pre-flop flop, and ended up folding on the turn. But I got stuck in that game roughly 1,800, so altogether I was down 2,500 at my worst point. And then yeah, I found a way to battle back and ultimately cashed out 31.97 in the 5-10 game, so book a profit of 197 in that game, but book an overall net loss of about 550, which I'll happily take. Did not play my best poker tonight. And that's gonna wrap it up for this session. I appreciate you guys watching, liking, commenting, subscribing. See you in the next video.